Have you eaten at Arbor?
It's good food.
Is it really?
Yes, amazing. I ate there like a lot this weekend.
Try that.
More than once on one weekend?
Yeah, I was kind of embarrassed. I was like, don't tell anybody. I was just
Why?
here
Because
like,
you don't want to cook?
How you doing?
yeah,
How are you?
yeah.
Good, Will.
We had
Good evening, Dave.
Hi.
Good evening and welcome to the Monday,
Mike.
April 14th, Washougal City Council Workshop meeting. Rose, could you call the roll, please?
Councilmember Lindsay,
Here.
Councilmember McDaniel,
Here.
Councilmember Greenlee,
Here.
Councilmember Shoemaker,
Here.
Councilmember Plinsky, Councilmember Plinsky,
Here.
Councilmember Freeman,
Here.
Councilmember Boger.
Councilmember Boger indicated he may or may not make it to either of the meetings this evening, so.
I just spoke with him and here he is.
Whoa.
Dun-dun-dun.
He lets us down.
Laughing
and
behind my
surprised.
back.
Doesn't have to say that now that they're here.
Sorry about my cell phone.
Are there any members of the public that would like to address council this evening? Okay, not your only opportunity. Going into new business. David, professional services agreement on new market tax credits.
Thank you, Mayor, Council. As you know, at your last workshop, we received a presentation regarding the federal new market tax credit program. Program that's designed to incentivize private capital into communities and to facilitate projects in areas where projects might not otherwise happen, or in areas where projects can be enhanced in their scope beyond what they might otherwise be by the influx of private capital. At that meeting, the council asked that we bring the documents that were necessary to get this kick-started with our partners in Quita, the Port, and the City of Camas, because time is of the essence somewhat on this project, and that we would workshop those documents this evening and then have them for your consideration at the regular meeting. Normally we would do it that quickly all in one night like that, but at your request we are doing that. So this is on consent for your approval this evening, and the document is a professional services agreement for new market tax credits. It's an agreement between the three members of Quita and the Quita. It identifies Quita as a lead agency in this effort, working with a consultant to establish the CDE that is required in order to be eligible for and to take advantage of the new market tax credits. CDE is the Community Development Entity. It provides for compensation at the same percentages that we use for the overall Quita funding, 50% for the port and 25% for each of the two cities. The total is $87,500. That would be the most that would be expended and then broken out according to those percentages. It is in 3 phases so that we ensure that each phase proceeds appropriately and that everything is taken care of at each phase before we move into the next phases. So there's a little accountability into the process of expending these funds. Phase 3 is the largest at $50,000. Attached to the professional services agreement, for reference only because the city of Washougal would not be entering into this agreement with the consultant, but is the professional services agreement that the Quita would be entering into, and that's attached for your reference only. Just a couple highlights to point out, and then Paul Dennis is here with Quita and Steve, I believe, who can come up and answer any questions that you have or provide other additional information. This would be a one-time endeavor financially for the Quita and its partners. The idea is to get this CDE up and running and make the first round of applications for this cycle. Thereafter, the concept in this program is that the CDE is functioning on its own as private money comes through. We are making application in a competitive process, so we will hope to be successful in the first year, but it is a competitive process. However, even if we aren't in the first year, we will have established the entity, and that entity could then undertake subsequent applications, particularly as private money comes and is interested in taking advantage of the incentive. So I think I'll leave it at that in terms of the staff report. It's again on consent for your approval this evening so that we can move forward on that. And I'll invite Paul and Steve to come up if there's anything they want to add or any questions that you have of them.
Good evening, gentlemen.
Thank you.
David?
Just something that you said there, I want to make sure I'll get this straight. The CDE gets up and running based on the initial input,
Correct.
and it doesn't get funded.
The projects don't get funded, is that what you're asking, or?
Yes, if it doesn't get funded.
Um,
Are we not on the hook to run the CDE for 7 years?
no. You wanna speak to?
We're on the hook to run it if it gets funded for 7 years.
No, the 7-year period is with respect to a project that has been funded by the CDE. So, for example, you do a development for $10 million. The funds that come from the banks primarily that buy the credits have to remain in that project for 7 years. And the CDE is responsible to report for 7 years on compliance. So the 7-year period is grows out of the fact that whatever funds come in as investment money.
I'm less
So
concerned about where it comes from than I am about the obligation to
that's,
keep it in existence for 7 years.
So as part of a project getting approval, Steve, is there fees associated to ensure that the paperwork is taken care of?
yes, thanks. Sometimes it takes me a while to get to the point. The project funding ordinarily includes a set-aside for the compliance work for the 7-year period. So there's a reserve for all tax and accounting. There's usually a audit requirement that's paid for, and also the compliance reporting that needs to be done. So for example, if there's one project that gets funded and nothing else ever happens, there's enough money in the system for a person to manage all the compliance work for the 7-year period. If nothing gets funded, the CDE has no operations.
Okay.
So the entity wouldn't necessarily require any ongoing kind of maintenance expenses if there was no projects. Ordinarily, if you don't get funded within 2 or 3 years, the thing just unwinds.
Paul?
I'm curious, I've heard several different answers to the question of involvement of residential component in a project. What's the answer on that? Can you have a mixed-use project which includes residential in it under new market tax credits?
Yes, you can. You need to be careful how you structure it. As a technical matter, at least 20% of the revenue generated by the project, rental revenue, has to come from non-residential sources. So you have a 5-story building, 2 stories as commercial, 3 stories as residential rental. As long as the commercial space generates more than 20% of the total rental income from the project, then it meets the requirements of the program. If it's for sale housing, there is no limitation or restriction.
And, okay, so that's only for rental.
Yes,
So condominiums would be for sale.
correct.
Another thing that I'm a little puzzled by, I keep getting different answers as to what the situation on Far West Steel was. someone who's closer to the project than I was said that his understanding was that the project was committed before anybody ever brought up new market tax credits, and that was a sweetener kind of after the fact. That the deal would have been done with or without, and that this just sweetened the deal for the developer.
I wasn't involved in the project, so I don't really
I
know.
have some knowledge of that. Go ahead. I'm not even sure what it has to do with this agreement, but.
Well, I spoke with a port commissioner about it Saturday, and he said that, yes, the project was committed before new market tax credits, but he also said because of new market tax credits, they went back and redid the project, redesigned it, was much bigger, more jobs, and then they applied for the new market tax credits from that. So literally that's true, but new market tax credits did result in a bigger project.
To what CDE did they apply?
There were two CDEs that I've seen the paperwork for. One was in Portland that supplied the bulk of the new market tax credits, and then there was a smaller one. I can't recall where that was out of.
Minnesota and North Carolina, there were three. According to the paperwork that I was given by Dave Brett, far west still.
Okay. But I think the bulk of those new market tax credits came from United Advisors in Portland.
And Community Reinvestment Fund in Minnesota,
Yes,
and Brownfield
that's-
Revitalization in North Carolina.
Okay,
Right.
I was missing the North Carolina one.
Yeah. So as a general matter, just to kind of follow up on that, because the program is very competitive, the CDEs, even if there's a significant amount of funding going into the project, they'll only bring in the tax credits if they can get additional community benefit, because that's how they get more credits the next year.
Right.
And so that's a typical situation where the new markets money will come in and it will allow the project to be larger and kind of focus more on job creation and other kinds of benefits. So,
And Jennifer touched on it, but that was kind of my next question, is the projects that have been done here in Washington State basically were done by effectively non-local CDEs.
Right.
And so I'm like to hear an explanation as to why there's an advantage to having a local CDE.
I'll let you start and I'll finish.
Yeah. Basically, unless there was a very large project in this area, and if you had 2 or 3 years, maybe 4 years, to start developing a relationship with a CDE, essentially, there's no access to the credits. All of the CDEs are oversubscribed in terms of projects that they can fund. So they go for sexy projects or projects that they've committed to in prior years that are kind of working their way up the pipeline. Far West Steel was a very sexy project because it created a lot of jobs, and it was an industrial project. Most of the CDEs, probably 70%, 65 to 70% are commercial real estate development. And this was considered more of an industrial business loan, and so that was.
So
Other than sexy, what do you mean by, what are you actually referring to instead?
Sexy, big, a lot of jobs.
Something that makes a big splash from a PR standpoint. And that's
Not just construction jobs and not just, minimum wage retail, but living wage, industrial jobs that require trained people, concentrations of jobs in an area that's considered distressed economically. Most CDEs currently only contribute about $10 to $15 million of credit per project because they want to have as many projects per year close as possible. Again, it's a competitive advantage in the application process. So one CDE could have done that project, but it's very rare that there will be a single CDE project anymore like that.
Brent? To follow up on Councilmember Shoemaker's question, which I think is getting at ongoing financial obligations of the city. After we approve this, we're basically only committed to $21,875 with this agreement.
Correct.
That's it, and we're not likely to have any other financial obligations to the city.
We won't be back.
We won't be back.
Ever, never.
I'd like to address that because the contract, as I understand it, says differently.
You might want to, yeah, I'd like to hear that.
Paragraph 3 of the expenses talks about a requirement for travel, lodging, and per diem expenses for necessary out-of-town travel that we approve. And my first question is, what kind of travel are we talking about? Where are we talking about? How many are we talking about? Are we talking about first class, coach class? What hotels are we talking about? Is there a cap on the expenses per day?
Well, so to some extent, that's my own language and it's standard, so I put it in there. But and I can clarify to whatever extent people intend. But the main thing is so that if the city wants me to go to a meeting or a conference, that cost is covered. I don't have any particular plans to go anywhere. There's no conferences that I need to attend. It's primarily at the request of the city or whoever's funding this. So I can change that to clarify.
Does the application require personal representation to submit it?
No, it's really just a catch-all to the extent that I'm requested by whoever I'm working for to go to Seattle, or there are annual conferences, professional conferences, if somebody thinks it's worth going to on behalf of the client, but it would have to be at the client's request. So
I've managed travel budgets, large ones. You can bleed yourself to death on travel.
Oh yeah, I know. I understand. No, but this is
21,375 is nothing compared to what you can get into in travel.
the only travel I expect to do is driving back and forth from Portland, or to the extent that there may be sites to look at. But this is not a travel-related kind of project. And again, I'm happy to put a proviso in there that this is only at the client's request.
Thank you.
That's what it says now.
Well, but I can clarify.
We can make it bold, capitals.
Connie Jo?
I had the same question about the forming of the
CDE.
CDE. In my notes, I wrote CBE, so I'll probably say it wrong all night.
All right.
Okay.
Oh, actually, I have it written twice, and it's written differently both times. So my question's the same as David's, because I'm looking at the council packet for tonight. In the summary statement, it says, formation of a community development entity is a necessary prerequisite to applying for and obtaining the new market tax credits. And so that makes it sound like, I realize you've already addressed it, but makes it sound like it's a new entity and it's around for quite a while. So you're saying if it's not funded,
It is.
but you just said if it's not funded, it'll go away in 2 or 3 years.
Or it goes dormant.
Or dormant. As a matter of legal compliance, so in other words, the federal government will only require activity if the CDE gets credit funding and then closes a transaction. If it doesn't get any credit allocation, it literally has no business to conduct. So it kind of sits as a shell. And I think to reiterate what Paul was saying is that the operation and ongoing function of this entity is going to not be the responsibility of any municipal entity. And so if we set this up and file an application, it's going to be QUITA's and other parties' responsibility to make sure that it's able to function going forward.
And if it's not funded first time out this year, continues to reapply annually until how long?
And
Forever?
well, I mean, the program, they issue credits every year, and as of now, there's no indication that the program will stop
So
having
you're
credits.
saying that for our different entities input financially, as long as the federal government has this program going, it will continue to ask for funds on our behalf
Yes,
for
yes,
these
yes.
Right,
projects?
but
Yeah.
we'll not be asking the three partners for
For more
any.
You're not gonna ask us for any more money,
Right.
but
Right,
this
but we'll
entity,
continue
the
to apply, the
CDE, is
yeah.
gonna just keep asking until it gets funded. And if it gets funded once, is it gonna continue to ask year
Yes.
after year?
Yes.
As long as we're eligible,
Yes, and
Correct.
as long as our community is eligible.
exactly, it's
Yeah.
all contingent on
Or
that.
until the partners decide to go dormant after the worst-case scenario
Sure.
of years of not succeeding.
So we, as a city and the port and Camas can say, and Quita, okay, I don't want to do this anymore. So, okay, another question. What is the deadline again for us to make this decision?
Soon. I mean, it's, I guess, if you work backwards from the filing deadline for the application,
Which was September?
so
September 30th.
September 30th is more or less, it changes every year. It's a 5-week to 6-week process to write the application. It's about a 2-month process to get the CDE certified. And it's probably a month or two to figure out whether there are local projects that are suitable for an application, and get all of the kind of preliminary work done and organizing and structuring the entity so that it can become a CDE.
So that feels like the
So it's like,
cart before the horse when you say to find out if there are local projects. So we're gonna go to all this work and we don't even know if there are projects?
no, that's the first step.
Yes.
That's the initial.
You're right,
phase.
I'm going backwards with you. And so
Okay.
the last thing you mentioned is the first step.
So that's the first step, and that
So
will,
how do we find those people that are interested in investing here?
So we have a number of private entities or organizations that have projects that they've come to us that they would like some type of partnership in funding. The port has plans for building another building out at Steigerwald, which we would use as one of our primary projects for the application. I've talked to the commission out there about building a bigger project than what they have plans for, I should say. We do have a company that is highly interested in locating out there, and my thought is to have a building that's bigger. Even if the company that we're dealing with doesn't take all the space, we would still have vacant space that then we could market to other folks that are still looking in this area that currently Port's 100% occupied, and unless someone's build to suit themselves, it's very difficult. And a lot of the smaller companies are making decisions today. They're not making decisions for a year out or two.
And are those investors willing to come and talk to us as a council, or are they just gonna stay hidden? Oh, you know what I mean by hidden.
yeah.
Behind the scenes, working with just you guys, not,
As part of the process,
because
they
it
would
certainly
they
would
would definitely
convince
come out.
us, possibly convince us easier if we saw these people face to face and they described to us what they wanted to accomplish.
We could always pose the question before the contract's approved, whether or not they want to personally be identified.
I don't know about my colleagues, but
No, I was
I
curious.
think seeing people over here on this at this table with us and saying, yeah, we're ready. Let's do it,
There's,
would be helpful.
and we haven't talked about this yet, but you may recall that there's an operating kind of operating function, and then there's what they call the advisory board.
Yes.
This is the community benefits analysis. The advisory board has to approve basically all projects. before they get final approval from the operating board. The plan that we've been discussing is to have representatives from each of the municipal agencies on that advisory board. So they would be, it wouldn't just be a matter of saying, oh, you know, hi, we really want to do this project. They'd have to come and actually demonstrate the economics of the project, the number of jobs they're going to create, how many people are going to get employed. So it would be much more in-depth kind of process than.
And where does that fall on the timeline?
That is, that's step 2. That's during the formation of the CDE, and the qualification. Part of that process is identifying the advisory board and getting them all qualified. And the advisory board has to have a certain level of representation of low-income communities within the service area for the CDE. Ordinarily, you try and get 80 to 100% representation. That's not the requirement, but again, as a competitive issue, it's generally, if you're lower than that, it's not favored. So part of the process of forming the CDE is identifying appropriate people who would be on the advisory board, and also developing the advisory board's operating principles and the guidelines about what they would require in order to approve a project.
Okay,
So there is a process for exactly that.
good.
It's not as public as.
It's not before this council, though.
Right,
Yes, I get that.
but there could, you know,
Certainly could be representation.
Yeah.
And we'd welcome that.
yeah.
Joyce?
Do you have any prospects for projects in Washougal?
Yes, so the port is a definite project. This council talked about a variety of different types of projects that we could try to incorporate. Part of phase 1 really is going out and identifying all the possible projects, and then working with Steve to figure out which ones would likely attract new market tax credits. How could they be enhanced if they don't attract it? I've heard all kinds of different suggestions, everything from how do we fund a potential library, which could be part of a project here in the downtown area. We do have a significant employer within this downtown area that wants to participate and be a part of the CDE. They've already strongly indicated. My reluctance to identify a project is I really need their permission before I submit anything forward. As part of phase 2, we'd have to describe what the projects are and list them out.
But you might want to ask them if it's okay. Just shoot us an email.
How big does a project have to be?
As a practical matter,
Yes.
at least $5 or $6 million.
I thought it was 10.
Well, that's the minimum for, that's as small as you can go. To try and attract a CDE from outside the area, anything smaller than $10 million is not going to get any kind of interest. And it would be difficult to, the CDE, in order to function properly, probably needs to be able to do about $20 million worth of projects over a 2-year period.
Is that one project or several?
It can be several, or it can be one, depends. So you're looking in because this would be a locally run small CDE, you can start, you can list a project that's at the $6 million, $7 million range. You have more flexibility, but over time, kind of 10 million is like you say, that's what people say in public. The smallest they'll go is 10 million.
Basically, the $20,000 is like a line pass, kind of. If you've ever been to you go to some place,
It's
it's a big
football.
line, you get a line pass, so you go to the head of the line. Because if we have to go to a CDE in Seattle or New York or Minneapolis or wherever these other ones were, we're going to have trouble getting their attention. But if we have our own CDE with these projects formed here for the benefit of this area, they're going to go right to the head of the line.
Right.
And that's basically what this is about.
Right.
Absolutely.
And the part of the business plan for the CDE is you have to be able to say why you're forming it and what community you're serving and what benefit you're going to bring. And so the fact that this will be targeted to, specifically to Washougal, Camas, and the port and then secondarily to Clark County, is going to put the CDE in a position where if they don't do that, they don't get another allocation because they didn't follow through on their business plan. So there's a lot of pressure to do what you say you're going to do and to have a very kind of sophisticated level of community involvement, again, because you're competing against so many other organizations that you really have to kind of have everything nailed down pretty tightly. So
Now, when you go to Treasury to get the CDE approved, well, actually, to get the allocation,
yeah,
they don't, at that point, they don't see projects particularly, right? It's just that the CDE makes a case for the community, or?
no,
what's the-
you need to be able to demonstrate that you have projects that you
Okay.
can fund.
Okay.
And close.
And close, exactly. So you do need,
So we need, if we form the CDE and we go to Treasury, there will have to be some projects
yes, Right.
ready to go.
yes, in a pipeline, yeah.
Jennifer?
A couple of my questions kind of piggyback on what we're already talking about, but it's my understanding that businesses wanting to locate here can get their new market tax credits from any CDE, because you can kind of see it from what we
Right.
talked about before. The CDEs were utilized in the Far West project, 3 different CDEs from all across the
Right.
country. And so if it's true, it means that a qualifying project from another city, like Seattle or Vancouver, can essentially deplete our CDEs and our new market tax credit?
It depends on how the CDE is structured. So the CDEs that did the Far West Steel project, they all had what's called a national service area, so that they could do projects in wherever they wanted. This CDE would have a much narrower service area. For practical purposes, you want to claim the county as your service area because simply you just don't want to amend every year and change your service area, because you have to then add new advisory board members. It gets really complicated. But if the service area and the business strategy is focused on a very local business, then nobody else can ask for credits. They have to be located in the service area, and they have to be located in a qualified census tract in that service area. And then they have to present a proposal that matches the business strategy of the CDE. So if the CDE has a business strategy of supporting local businesses in Camas and Washougal and the port as their primary business model, and then secondarily, they'll look at projects outside if there are no projects locally that meet the criteria for the program, et cetera, then you, like you're saying, you always start with the local projects. And only if there is no project that can be funded do you go to the next level. So that's kind of how it would be structured. So UFA, again, just as a little kind of gossipy aside, United Fund Advisors, they started out as in the Portland metropolitan area, and they changed their business model to be national, and now half of their projects are in New York City because there's 150 projects a year that qualify, and they can get rid of their money really, really fast. NDC is the same way. They do projects. They have like 300 or 400 projects on their pipeline at any one time. The other thing, the other group specifically only does brownfields. So that's one of their limitations, is that if the project isn't in a brownfield, they won't put credits in. So it's, again, probably an overly long answer to the model will be local first. And so Seattle they wouldn't even get in the door.
Do you find that the projects that get funded are really more nonprofit? Like
It's about
housing authority projects or those types of things?
They're eligible for different tax credits, housing authority.
Yeah, it's I think about 40% of the projects are nonprofit community facilities, libraries, other kinds of community projects. Probably about 60, 65% are either real estate development or business loans, business expansion. You can use it for equipment purchase, lots of different kinds of.
How would you structure a library project? Because doesn't it require some kind of income stream?
It would be structured probably as a private developer developing the business, the library, and then the municipality paying rental, kind of like a
Or the library district.
Oh, I see.
yeah, like a lease to purchase kind of arrangement.
Design build kind of.
Design build, yeah.
Okay, Joe, you have a question?
Of course, we always ask lots of questions about the money.
Mhm.
So it's a one-time only. We've got that now. That feels good. But, so we give the money, the CDE's developed, and we no longer are asked for any more. But then the CDE makes all the decisions down the road. Like, okay, we never got funded after 3 years, let's quit this. Does the city and the port, do the cities and the port get included in that discussion?
So the CDE, if I'm not mistaken, has a governing board and an advisory board.
Right.
And
So who's on, I know who's on the advisory board already, pretty much, you said.
Yeah.
But what about the governing board? Who is that made up of?
The governing board will be made up of whoever is maintaining this entity moving forward, paying the costs of
So-
operations.
so likely in most cases would be the private investors that are looking to do projects in the Camas-Washougal area. And that's, if we go back a few months ago when the renewed interest came about, it was the private sector coming to us saying, hey, we want to try to make use of this tool. The port and our organization's been trying for a couple of years to get other organizations, whether they're regional or national, to come in and look at some of our projects, and we've received virtually no response back. It's either we're too busy, your project's not big enough, or there's just no return phone call. So we started from that step, trying to get someone else to come in first. Have been highly unsuccessful. And then through discussions over the last few months, decided that if we're really going to utilize this tool, then we probably should set up our own entity. And then that caused us to start looking around.
Well, so as the funders of this one stage, I realize there's lots of other costs out there, and it's not ever funded. We don't have a say in pulling the plug or insisting that it continue on. We'll be happy if it is funded and
Right.
projects
Right.
get built.
Right.
So
So
that's not
which
even a
is-
question.
Right.
The
So
question
Yeah.
is,
Which is always.
if it's never funded and we put this investment in,
Mhm.
are we part of the voice to say, yeah, we're done, you tried your best, we're happy if you pull the plug? Or no, we want to give it another couple of years of trying.
I don't see us pulling the plug without having a discussion with our partners. That'd be presumptuous on our part and a bit arrogant if we just decided we've tried for a couple of years, we're just done.
So is that something that can be written up in a contract where we have an agreement that we come together after X amount of years if it never got funded?
Lawyers
That's
with
an
lawyers,
agreement between
anything can happen.
the cities and the port and CUIA.
Right.
Isn't that where we would do that?
That would be my guess, but I would want.
I think that's just
I would
simple
want
protection.
a legal opinion on that.
Uh-huh.
And I'm not an attorney, so I'm a little reluctant to.
Okay,
So
it's just
My
a thought,
intent would
it's just a
be,
thought.
I can tell you my intent would be not to just shut something down without going to my three partners.
We would tar and feather you.
You probably would,
Yeah.
and I would deserve it, wouldn't I?
If I could kind of go sideways a little bit.
Sure.
When United Fund Advisors were first created, it was created through Portland Development Commission. But in Oregon, a municipal entity cannot own an interest in a private business. And under the rules of this program, the entity has to be either a corporation or a limited liability company or partnership. And so counsel for PDC determined that they couldn't own an interest in this entity. In that case, they formed it as a non-shareholder, non-profit that PDC didn't actually run, but it was this very convoluted kind of legal relationship. So PDC was always involved, but they were never part of the management of the entity, and that had a lot to do with the Oregon State Constitution.
Which prohibits owning private,
Interest in it.
Washington
private
has a similar thing, but it's stock corporations.
Right. So part of the issue is kind of resolving the legal relationships between the city, the port, both cities, the port, and this entity that has to kind of, from the federal point of view, operate like a private company. And those can be negotiated and managed, and part of the process of kind of going through these stages is getting to the point where everyone's comfortable with that. But it's hard to, I want to say yes.
My final answer is maybe.
No, my final answer is yes, probably, but I don't know how yet. And, that'll be part of this ongoing process of kind of working this.
Okay, thank you.
I want to make sure that I got this straight based on the contract.
Sure.
Once the CDE is up and running, you're done.
I'm done unless the people running the CDE say, we want to hire you for more work, but that would be a separate agreement with the CDE as an entity. The work that we're contracting goes through writing the application, and then I'm done under that contract.
And that, you answered my next question.
Yeah, okay.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Looking at the contract and the services portion of it,
Yes.
it says the contractor will provide reports and materials that address the following. What does address mean?
Address, answer,
Respond to.
respond to.
Hadn't thought about
Well,
that.
let me clarify that.
Sure.
What I'm after is, do you make applications or do you guide someone else to do it?
Oh, okay. I will be writing the application myself with the assistance of local people. I'll be writing the application to get certified as a CDE, and I'll be preparing a report in phase 1 to Paul that kind of analyzes all of the projects that they've brought to us and gives kind of a market analysis. Say we have 3 projects, this is how they should be structured for purposes of the application to be. So it would be an analysis of, this is what you have, this is the likelihood of getting an award based on that.
Have we not already done several analyses in the last few years in this area?
This is specifically for a new market tax credit application, whether these projects are going to be significant enough that you have the likelihood of actually winning an application. So in other words, you don't want to go through all this work and have projects that aren't substantive enough to get an award. So it's a competitiveness analysis, I guess, is the best way to put it.
Thank you.
So it would be taking information you've already gathered.
Jennifer?
Okay. Yeah, going over just I guess the pass-through contract, that's for reference only. It does say the governing law and the venue is the state of Oregon. So is that going to be corrected?
That's for my agreement?
Right.
So that's one of the things that we'll be in discussion about changing that to Clark County instead of Multnomah County.
And the laws of Oregon, or Washington.
Washington,
yeah,
right.
that's fine.
There were, Mr. English provided us with some comments, and I had responded back to the CUITA board about how I would propose addressing those. And those 2 particular items were, my suggestion was Clark County and the laws of the state of Washington, because that's where the entity would be formed.
I don't have any problem with I mean, it's just a services contract, I don't.
We allow that in Washington, too.
Is that all you had, Jennifer?
Yeah, that was
Oh,
one of
that
the
it?
questions. Go ahead, Karen.
So you said, like, say you have 3 different projects, you would just submit an application for the one you felt was best, no?
We would list all 3. And so the application is a request to issue a certain amount of tax credits.
Okay.
Basically, the way it works is that the Treasury gives you the right to sell tax credits to investors. But the CDE has to promise to use all that money in projects that are qualified under the program. So basically, you're asking for the right to sell $20 million worth of tax credits.
And then reinvest those dollars into the local community.
Right. Normally, they want to see more than just $20 million worth of projects. They want to know that you have, if you know you're going to fund one, they want to see you have 3 or 4, because if that one takes too long or falls through for some reason, you have other alternatives. So you end up listing more projects than you actually intend to fund in that round. So that's where that would come from.
When do you find out if you were awarded the tax credits?
Next April.
About a year from now.
About a year from now.
Year.
It's
They-
very similar to like community block grants and other programs. Usually you file application in the fall, and then you don't find out until spring. In some cases, maybe early summer, whether or not you got your allocation. But there's usually enough time so that you can repackage and resubmit if you didn't get your allocation. Jen?
Paul?
I'm curious, I mean, the phrase commercial developer was used, and I'm not sure I know what I mean, that's so broad, I'm not sure I know what it means. Typically, how much of these projects are retail development?
I think the percentage is about 40 to 45%. I'd have to check.
That are commercial?
That are commercial or mixed use. Commercial retail as opposed to industrial,
Well, or commercial offices. or-
commercial office, right. I really don't have the numbers off the top of my head. It's available on the CDFI website, and I'd be happy to.
Oh, okay, I was just curious whether this is a typical tool for financing retail development, or it is.
Yes. It's, but not in, there aren't a lot of suburban areas that necessarily qualify, though.
As retail.
As low income, as the right kind of census tract. So like all of Washougal, basically, all of the area kind of on this side of the river is considered a qualifying census tract.
And then downtown Camas, One Stop, and Oak Park neighborhoods qualify.
Yeah, but you couldn't use it for up on the.
Up on Prune Hill, you can't use it at Camas Meadows Golf Course.
You can't use it some places in North Washougal, too.
Correct.
Right.
Yeah.
That's why I said this side of the
And-
river.
And then I was just curious, had there been any thought to including all or part of Skamania County in the area of interest?
Later.
Okay.
I think it's again, for me, it always comes back to you plotting out your application.
Right, right.
It's difficult as a new entity to get an allocation beyond a certain size because they just don't believe you can get the funding out.
Right.
You just have to have a certain level of kind of infrastructure to be able to handle $40 or $50 million a year. But as you build the infrastructure, then you expand your service area. So.
So if I understand kind of the way this works, you have a advisory committee which puts together an application as long, and with that, there are projects. But what's really awarded is tax credits based on a competitive score, not so much on the individual projects, but on the community involvement, the reach of the project in terms of especially low or moderate income, and so forth. And so then at that point, a bucket of credits are allocated to the CDE. The CDE then sells those credits and must use those proceeds, and hopefully more, in investments into projects like, but not necessarily exactly the ones which were submitted with the application.
That's very good. That's exactly right.
Thank you.
There's only a few little things, but we
Yeah,
don't really
well,
know that. Well, no,
It doesn't have to be the project that's submitted.
it doesn't technically have to be. The one piece that's important to remember is that that bucket of money represents about 18% of the
Right.
project cost.
Right.
So it's an incentive to bring in, to build a facility or to bring in a business or whatever that wouldn't normally have come because there's that 18 to 20% funding that they can't get over. So it's an inducement.
On a risk-return basis.
Exactly. So that's exactly right.
Jennifer?
Yeah, that's good. There, just said the word risk, and I just want to kind of talk about that a little bit, because if you go to the Community Development Financial Institution Fund website, and you can print out the awardees and allocatees, basically by state, and you can also, sort it by program or year, that sort of thing, which I did for the state of Washington all the way back to 1996. And so if you take a look at, the big projects, I mean, I'm not talking about like 600,000 or,
Right.
Whatever projects, really, really big projects, 20 million plus. Almost all of these, like the King County Housing Authority in Seattle, Seattle Investment Fund, I mean, almost all of them are Seattle-Tacoma.
Right.
With the exception of some business loan programs, like up on the peninsula. There was a $140 million one, I believe, in Forks, that was partnership between two CDEs over there, about 2005.
140 million in Forks?
That was the project cost, and
Oh,
and there was about 27.5 million in tax credits. That one caught my eye, that's why I looked at it.
I'm just curious, why,
Why could you spend 140 million on Forks?
Build a new
It was for
city.
business finance, so it probably was based in Forks, but probably had a whole peninsula
Okay.
Yeah.
perspective.
I actually visited there.
well, you just kind of wonder,
first
because I
Radius
mean, out of
part-
all of the
radius city in the
allocations,
continental US.
there's usually
It's
a
one-
big chunk that goes to,
Radius city in the continental
one
US.
CDE, and then
Right.
there's very small chunks that seem to get distributed on a yearly
Right.
basis. If you take a look from 2013 back to 1996
So-
was when they first.
I can give you an example of how that works. Again, this is, at United Fund Advisors, because it was formed in conjunction with the city of Portland and PDC, there was an emphasis on trying to help fund small business financing with small business loans. Very complicated to do with this kind of program, but we structured a small business lending program that used, essentially supplemented, I can't possibly explain how it happened. It would take drawing and everything. But we were able to carve out about $5 million of allocation to make small business loans. Each of those loans qualified as a separate project in our annual reporting. So it was $20,000, $50,000, $75,000, but it was a $5 million allocation. In a lot of these larger projects, I mean, when the program first started, you need a critical mass, and so it's going to be concentrated in large urban areas where they have, high concentrations of low poverty areas, and you can kind of get people together to say, let's build a health facility for $40 million.
Right.
And so that's, the bulk of the money tends to show up in those areas, and then, but all of these organizations will carve out a small amount of the allocation to use for smaller projects. Or in some cases, you'll have a community that will get a single allocation, and then it'll take 2 or 3 years to get it all out because they'll focus on smaller community projects. So over time, that's kind of how the money ends up getting distributed out. 'Cause we've done projects in Seattle where we being, when I worked for United Fund Advisors, we did the Seattle Children's Hospital. And I think there were 2 or 3 CDEs involved in that as well. And so, you know, you'll see these big numbers, but then each of the CDEs has their own separate little projects.
So you can partner then with other CDEs,
Yes,
Exactly.
other agencies.
yes.
Right. I was just curious, my next question is, why aren't there more of these in our area? Is it because of, you know, your, the Portland CDE, the United Fund Advisors, is this so big?
They're not that big. I mean,
It's
they
like a
use up-
competition?
They used up, they use it, well, there's no real, because nobody kind of
Right.
got
I
off
mean,
their horse and did it.
Well,
Nobody
the
asked?
only one
Except
the
for
closest
Vancouver.
one I
I
found
can-
geographically to us is the Vancouver Housing Authority.
well,
That's the only one I saw, the CDE, that's the closest in Clark County.
I can go through my, limited experience in it. City of Vancouver wanted to refurbish the barracks at Fort Vancouver and turn it into art studios or something like that, and, with a commercial, with a retail element. And we scrambled. It was extraordinarily complex. I think, frankly, this Vancouver staff tried to do too much on their own, and it's just not an easy thing to do. And I think in the case here, we have people that have, your business has experience in this, and you know what needs to be done, and you can tell our story. I think that's part of the problem. We didn't know how to tell our story to Treasury, and I think you do, and I think we have a compelling story out here. Sure. We have some of the highest, distressed areas in the county. Probably Vancouver has more, but we have a significant part of our community that qualifies that as red zone that we saw that map earlier.
Yeah.
And when you have an entity that's created basically to address that distressed area, I think that's going to get the attention of the Treasury Department.
It's the technical complexity of the program is such that for the city to try and do something like this on their own would take 3 or 4 years. I mean, you just have to accumulate enough knowledge to be able to understand how to write your application, how to, put your operations together. And if it doesn't work the first time, then the political will it's hard to get people to say, oh, let's go and do this again. And so it is it's a complex thing, and I'm not surprised. Well, we watched this area kind of struggle with the new markets thing, and frankly, the guys over at United Fund Advisors, they went from Multnomah County to national because they found a deal with New York, and they said, we get $50 million, we can get rid of all of it right away, and there's no real incentive for them to cross over the river and try and find a project here. They have more people knocking on their door than they can possibly help fund. When I left, we had a list of 275 projects from around the country, and they're all,
But not many local
no,
projects.
not many.
Odd.
Oh, well,
It's such a benefit.
mhm.
Why aren't people beating down their door right here in Clark County?
I think
Okay, we'll
because
take
it's
the opportunity.
Right.
That's the
I
reason
think
we're
because
here. We
it's
want to take the
such a
opportunity.
technical program, and some of the smaller entities like UAF have gone national because they just went to where they could sell off those credits easier and didn't want to take the time to nurture and develop their own local market.
Well, and also Portland, the downtown Portland area has significant qualifying census tracts. So within Portland, there are dozens. And so it's actually, it would take quite a bit of effort to somebody would have to really be paid to come over to this area and look around for projects.
And Washougal couldn't do it on its own, and Camas wouldn't do it on its own, and the port wouldn't do it on its own, but as a group,
As a group, it
we
makes sense.
certainly can make a presentation.
I think so.
Other questions for Steve or for Paul?
I have other questions, but mainly for us.
Yeah, when do we get to discuss this among ourselves? Right here and right now?
Or it's on the agenda
Pull it-
tonight
pull
on
it off
consent,
consent.
so you could,
So we pull it
Discuss it
from the
then.
consent and we have a discussion there? Well, you have to tell us about that agenda, whether or not we should do it here or do it there.
we can be adaptable.
I think we
Right.
should talk while it's fresh.
It'd be great to get through some of this workshop too.
We've got 3 other things there.
I
Well,
think
yeah,
Workshop.
but he's saying you can be flexible.
we definitely need to update you on the water system comp plan, and we definitely need to set the hearing on this evening for that, because we're on a timeline for that. We need, community development needs to get that professional services agreement locked up. That, I think's like a 30-second presentation. If you even need one on that. That's on consent as well. It's,
I don't have any concerns about that.
Under your 30-second right now?
There you go.
Time's up.
Mitch, let's talk about professional services agreement with
Thank
Wallace
you.
Engineering.
Thank
On
you.
the consent this evening is
Go
a
away, though.
professional service agreement with Wallace Engineering to provide development engineering services for community development. It's a $15,000 budgeted item within the 2014 budget. The item is on consent to have the mayor sign the PSA.
Can you give us an example of the types of things that they'll be doing?
They review subdivision applications, short plat applications, site plan review applications, anything community development related.
Any other questions for Mitch?
30 seconds? With
Rob,
questions?
come on up.
Oh,
With questions.
Mayor and Council, I just want to give a quick overview before we get into the Water Comprehensive Plan. We originally engaged with Murray Smith and Associates in 2009 to update our comp plan. We've had a couple of deferrals, extensions that were granted by the Department of Health as we did some pressure improvement, capital improvements in the northeast portion of our distribution system. We also had a deferral until action was taken on rates, which took place in October of last year. So we did get those extensions from Health, and Rob and Brian Ginter will be walking you through that, and Mitch has been shepherding that through as far as the planning side and planning requirements. Thanks.
Yeah, so I just wanted to add quickly to Trevor that Department of Health's been very lenient with us in our extension. The plan was done in 2012, and we've gone through some different processes that have extended it out to 2014. So that's why we are very anxious to get this to a public hearing and over to Health, so we can maintain our green tag status and not drop into a yellow or worse, red moratorium status. Let me turn over to Brian and walk through the actual document itself.
Thanks. I'm Brian Ginter with Murray Smith and Associates, and we're the engineers that did the water system plan. I'll try to move pretty quickly through so that this kind of fat document gets summarized down to what's important for you. If you have questions, give you some time for that. Really quickly, I'll cover just some background, what's in the plan, really quick description of the existing water system. It's documented well in here, but I'll move through that pretty fast. Present the results of the water system evaluation, and get to the part that really matters, the plan improvements. What are the costs and next steps? So purpose of the water system plan, it's a long-term guidance document with a 6-year focus. You need to update the plan every 6 years, as Rob said. If you don't update the plan, the Department of Health comes and it's a bad thing. So you do need to do that. It's a requirement, state law. And basically, it identifies improvements for the city's capital improvement program, looks at the financial condition of the city's water utility. Your last plan was done in 2005, so when we started in 2009, we were on schedule to complete it in that cycle. And then, as Rob mentioned, we've had some delays and gotten extensions from the state so that your permit stays green. There's been some new regulatory requirements since 2005 that are addressed. The largest one is the 2007 water use efficiency rule. Essentially, that rule requires water utilities to make sure that they're using water efficiently, not letting it leak out of the pipes, and making sure that you have appropriate conservation programs, those types of things. Summary of the plan contents. You've all seen copies of it. So basically, there's 5 primary chapters. It goes through a description of the system, the water demands and population forecasts that we use, the analysis of the system we did, your compliance with water use efficiency, the financial plan. That particular chapter since has been largely superseded by the work you've done with rates since then. And then a number of appendices. That's just a lot of required material that needs to be included in the plan as well. So the major work elements of this project were data collection, evaluation of water demands. That's really the basis of the work we're doing. We look at how much water does the city use today, how much do we forecast it's going to use in the future as we analyze the system. We look at all the components of the system. Is there enough capacity in the pipelines and in the reservoirs and the pump stations? What are the improvements that are needed if there are capacity limitations? And then what's it going to cost to make those upgrades that need to happen? The current status, the plan was completed and reviewed by city staff. We went through SEPA, and that was completed back in June of 2012. And now we're here to get to the final step. Quick overview of the water system. Essentially, the black outline up there is the existing water service area. The pinkish coral-colored area outside of that is your kind of retail water surface area, so that's the area you could serve immediately within the existing urban growth area. And then the large blue area is the ultimate area that the city would serve that's been delineated by the county. Obviously, a lot of that area you're never going to serve because it's out in the scenic area, but essentially you're responsible for all of the eastern limits of the county.
Would that be subject to annexation?
That would all be subject to annexation, that's correct. Yep. Overview of the water system. What this picture really highlights is that in order for people to have adequate pressure, the water's got to be lifted at least 100 feet approximately above your home. And so you've got reservoirs throughout town that do that. The water's pumped up to reservoirs. That provides the pressure for you. And then it's let back down through a system of piping that's buried in the streets to your home. Your sources are all down at the lowest levels, and so there's a series of pump stations pumping that water up the hill to serve customers. Just an overview of number of services at the time when the plan was done. About 5,700 water services throughout the city, largely residential, so the majority of your customers are residential. You do have a number of large industrial users as well, but really primarily residential, and then those industrial down in the core part of the city.
What are recreational services?
Planning Commission asked that same question, and it's a high number. It has to do with how the water systems were, or the services were categorized in the past. Your most recent work on the financial side included an update of those service classifications, and that category really has gone away since then. It covered a lot of kind of catch-all services that now have been better categorized into commercial, institutional, park, city. The important thing on this slide is the column labeled MDD, so that's maximum day demand. When we analyze the system, we look to make sure it has adequate capacity under that peak day, that hot day in the summertime, at the end of July. We want to make sure there's enough water in the storage reservoirs, there's enough capacity in the pipeline to deliver flow for both that demand and any fire suppression needs. So if there's a fire, you've got to be able to maintain pressure under those conditions as well. So in the 6-year projection, we look at about a 4.24 million gallon per day demand. The 20-year projection, we see growth in the city. Growth means more water use. Even with conservation, there is going to be more water use, so close to 6 million gallons per day at the 20-year projection. and the corresponding population is presented there in the second column with that. So we take those numbers, that area that we're looking at, and we look at the supply to the city. So where does your water come from? The pump stations, how does it get lifted up to those reservoirs? The storage, how much storage do you have? Do you have adequate storage? And then the piping system. And I'll talk about each of those briefly. Starting with source, I've got a lot of numbers here. I'm going to skip to the end of the story and then come back. So you have adequate supply capacity for our 20-year planning horizon. You've got wells in a lower well field, 5 of them. You've got the upper well field at the Hathaway Park that's got 1 operating well and 1 standby well, so you have a total supply capacity of 8.1 million gallons per day. If you remember back to the maximum day demand we presented, ultimately that was 6 MGD, so you've got more supply than you have a need on a peak day, so you're in good shape. With work that you've done in the last couple of years, you also have adequate water rights to support the use of those wells. And beyond the 20-year planning horizon, you've done some future supply planning related to the Steigerwald area, the port property, for future development of a well field. Storage is provided for 4 purposes. Essentially, you want your wells to be able to turn on and off during the day, so a portion of that capacity allows the wells to turn off and rest while the reservoirs serve customers. You have equalizing storage. People use water in the morning at 6 a.m. Everybody gets up. Irrigation systems turn on. They take showers. They use a lot of water. In the middle of the day, it lags. In the evening, everybody comes home. They use a lot of water again. Maybe they turn their sprinklers on in the evening, and then all night long, people use very little water. So we see that use go up and down. We don't want the wells to have to respond to that, and so the reservoirs provide an amount of storage to kind of buffer out those differences in demand during the day. The third and probably most important component is fire suppression. So a fire flow event when there's a fire at a home requires anywhere from 1,000 up to 3,000 gallons per minute of water to be supplied for firefighting purposes over a couple of hours. You don't want your source to have to supply that on demand. So again, there's water stored in those reservoirs to serve those needs. And then the fourth component is standby or emergency. If something happens to your wells, you want to have some water in the storage that allows crews to get out, fix a mechanical failure, address a power outage, those types of things. You've got just under 5 million gallons of usable storage in the system. And what we saw is that there's needs at various levels. So I showed that picture with reservoirs going up the hill. You've got a need for some additional storage at different elevations throughout the system. One of those projects you're currently working on and progressing. And the others are both in the short term, so less than 10 years, and long term, beyond 20 years, the need to build additional storage as you have done.
I noticed that the usable storage capacity is very close to the maximum daily demand. Is that a good thing, irrelevant, what?
They're related. So all of these are fairly objective calculations. We plug numbers into a formula to calculate, and maximum day demand is a component. So your standby storage, for example, which is the biggest component, is required to be 2 times your average day demand. It happens to be the maximum day demand is fairly close to 2 times average day demand, so it does work out a lot of times as a rough rule of thumb.
But that's the design criterion, is twice the average
That's
demand?
correct.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. So again, additional storage is needed, and as we get to the CIP, you'll see some recommended improvements there. Pump station capacity tends to go hand in hand with reservoirs. You tend to size pump stations to supply the water that you need for those reservoirs. So you need additional storage capacity. You also have additional pump station capacity that's required to serve those reservoirs. The distribution system, so the piping network that supplies water, we have some criteria that we have to meet in terms of maintaining minimum pressures in the piping system. We build a hydraulic model that we use to analyze the system. We went with crews out and we actually flow fire hydrants and measure pressure to see how the system performs and calibrate our model. End result is that there are some improvements that are needed, both transmission, so between those pump stations and reservoirs, piping needs to be large enough to get the water up to the reservoir, and then piping throughout the city needs to be upsized to provide for looping, so both upsizing and looping to provide for fire suppression. So that's really the big load on the system, is when that fire event happens, you need to be able to get the water back to the hydrant. This is the biggest cost in the CIP as well, so it's about $17.5 million spread over the 20-year planning horizon, and that's in looping and upsizing largely adding new pipes, replacing old aging pipes in the system. So the next 3 slides highlight really the culmination of the plan, the capital improvement program. So here we've got the overall CIP for storage facilities is about just under $10 million, and it's spread out in projects over the short term between now and 2018, 2019 to 2022, and then 2023 to 2032. So we try to prioritize and spread these projects out so the costs are managed over that time. So a number of reservoir projects that would occur over that time, and you guys are working on one of those right now that's underway, and so just continuing that program. The next piece is the pumping facilities associated with those reservoirs, and so these are timed largely so that pump station projects can happen in sequence with reservoir projects where it's appropriate. About $3 million in pumping improvements over the 20-year planning horizon. The distribution system improvements, again, $17.5 million over the 20 years, and that's spread out with kind of less load in the front end because you do have some larger reservoir projects, and then more significant investment during the second half of the 20-year planning horizon, recognizing that in addition to capacity, you're also going to have aging pipes that are going to need to be replaced and continue in that program. The summary of the CIP, so putting all those numbers together, the 6-year annual average is a little over $1 million a year in capital improvements for the water system on average over the first 6 years, and then about $1.3 million over the first 10 years. We tend to look at just that first 10-year window. You're going to update the planning in 6 years, and so you'll look at that second set of 10 years and decide, do this project still make sense at that time, and update that. The financial evaluation, again, you've done additional work since then, but essentially it looks at the total cost of providing water service, both in terms of O&M and capital improvements, and make sure that the water system utility is financially healthy. That's what the state's looking for here. So we went through a number of components that you've since updated and done work on, looking at funding resources, your funding plan, rate adjustments, a financial forecast, and affordability of rates. And the highlight here is that you've adopted 2014 to 2018 water rates as of November of 2013 that was based on the capital improvement program that was included in this plan. So even though this work's dated, your current water rates are based on this plan. So I went through that fairly fast, but next steps would be, so we submitted the plan back in June of 2012 to both the Department of Health and to adjacent water purveyors. It's been reviewed. We've addressed all their comments. It's been essentially approved pending other approvals at this point. So that review was complete in August of 2012. November of 2012, DOH approved the comments. We've been through SEPA already. So at this point, the next step is moving forward with adoption of this plan.
Questions, Paul?
It's not mentioned in the plan, but I was curious if the Steigerwald well field, best guess, could produce how many millions?
50 MGD.
50?
Yeah, ultimately.
So that's huge. I mean, if we're looking at 20-year demand of 6.6.
What is Camus's demand, though? Because Camus is in on
Oh,
that as
that's
well,
right.
and on their industrial side, they've got a huge draw. They've
That's-
got all
that's
ours
right.
plus some.
Yeah, their demand would be is close to twice Washougal's today, and I think they have probably a similar growth horizon. So.
Thank you.
Other questions? Okay, so Rob, this is on consent tonight to set the hearing, correct?
Correct.
Awesome. Thank you. Brian, thank you.
Thank you.
Trevor,
It's working well at my house.
are you taking pavement management? Or transportation benefit districts?
I freak out every fall
Get-
when I
get
get
what
that
you
bill.
want.
Okay.
It's probably just because we water a ton.
Yeah.
The presentations on the top left.
My son moved house. And we brought it down. Shocking.
It's bad
right, pavement management, level of service and funding options. Our last touch was at the council retreat, I believe in mid-January. It was discussed for maybe 25, 30 minutes. The outcomes of that and the request to look into potential other options for funding and scrubbing transportation benefit district and other opportunities were brought up. So that's the core of what we're bringing back today.
What do you mean by scrubbing?
Taking a look at it to see what the framework looks like.
You guys have your little language.
Scrubbing is taking it off.
Yeah,
Yeah.
bureau speak is
Remove
what
it.
they call it. But so the current pavement management funding, what's been budgeted or appropriated for 2014, pavement management, defining it, the current pavement condition index, the PCI, pavement management program, the funding options, and then looking at transportation benefit district and local improvement district. So for 2014, there's $212,000 that has been budgeted. $150,000 of that comes from real estate excise tax, and a one-time contribution that council approved of $62,000. So getting into pavement management system dating back to 1990 and researching the acronym, American Association of State Highway and Transportation Officials, the ability to maintain streets, assets in a professional manner based in quantitative data is ultimately what it boils down to. So the high-level benefits, multiple points here or bullets as far as customer satisfaction, better informed decisions, again, the quantitative data, improving the strategies and techniques, knowing what needs to be maintained and preserved, cost savings, and increased safety, ultimately. So this illustration is quite telling in regards to a typical street when it goes into service. You start at the top left of the graph. Excellent. We had talked earlier about SR 14 going into service last year and being at the score of PCI of 100. Typically, asphalt, cement, AC roads, once they're constructed and put into service, there's a deterioration curve. And that curve is impacted on treatments where you see the upticks of where the PCI jumps up a little bit higher if you're able to get out and crack seal the road or slurry seal or chip seal the road. You buy yourself some more time, and it says inside of this illustration, spending $1 early saves you 6 to 10 in full rehabilitation at a later date. So you'll see the red cross that's imposed on the steep curve. That puts us close to where we're at currently in aggregate as a citywide transportation system.
So the deterioration is about to commence in earnest.
It gets pretty steep in the next 2 or 3 years, indeed.
But that's taken into consideration the really old ones,
Yep.
and we're looking at some that are brand new.
Takes into account all of them.
Right,
This is
Yeah.
an average.
average.
In aggregate, all the subdivisions that have been platted over the last decade, downtown, chip seal roads, old county roads that are, chip seal road oil mat. They're not actually asphalt. So it takes all of those into consideration for the overall score, PCI.
Okay.
So again, PCI is hovering right around 80. We did have that work done almost a year ago by Mr. Condor with CAPS. And so as we speak, the PCI starts to slip depending on the funding options that are chosen. Over time, money spent early saves dollars later. I showed that briefly on the illustration on the previous slide. And this just gives you a general sense of deterioration in 3 different scenarios for the next 5-year horizon. The first scenario is a 500,000 scenario on an annual basis. The second is a 360,000. The 360,000 is underpinned and financed from a continual appropriation of real estate excise tax of 150,000 and the creation of a transportation benefit district with a tab fee of $20 per vehicle license within City of Washougal jurisdiction.
That's the 360,000?
Has 150,000 of REIT embedded in it, as well as the 210,000 and change that's projected from creating a transportation benefit district and a $20 tab fee. And then the last scenario is continue forward with what has been appropriated for 2014, the 212 for this year, and then moving forward, leveraging REIT at $150,000 a year without any other funding mechanism to preserve and maintain surface streets.
What's the level of precision on those arrows? Is that just kind of-
You'll see in the next slide.
15 degrees.
I wouldn't drill into that as hard and fast accuracy.
This is what it is.
No.
This really gives you a better sense, and you'll see that the starting point was actually March 2013. So we have another year of wear and tear with limited preservation that took place last year as far as our citywide network for surface streets. So looking at those three different scenarios, if you will, for funding, the $500,000 per year scenario keeps you at 80 across the board in aggregate citywide for the pavement condition index. Scenario 2, that dips to 79 and then hovers for the next 4 to 5 years and balances out at 78, is the 350 or 360,000 option with the 150 from REIT and the creation of a TBD $20 tab fee. And then scenario 3 is moving forward with the 212,000 that has been appropriated this year with the 62,000 one time, and then moving back to just leveraging REIT to preserve streets. Any questions on that? Pretty telling there. So this is hard to tell. In looking at the neon green and orange inside of the legend, you'll see that the orange is asphalt overlay or a grind inlay, and the green is a slurry seal. Slurry seal is really a preservation or treatment over existing asphalt roads. We go in and clean and crack seal those roads and then put a slurry over the top, and it buys us several years. It's that continuing deterioration curve of buying yourself more time and ticking it back up and not letting it fall into basically a failure, if you will. So just stepping back, that is scenario 1, current funding allocated for 2014, and then moving forward with just leveraging REIT over the 5-year horizon. Scenario 2 takes into consideration REIT as well as the creation of a transportation benefit district of $20 tab fee per registered vehicle.
All of these scenarios, in fact, Trevor, include the one-time, supposed one-time.
2014 does. Yeah, the assumptions moving forward with REIT is just 150,000. Obviously, that's somewhat volatile as far as real estate excise
From
tax.
2015 on, it's just the REIT.
Yep. Does that make sense? Okay. Okay. And then this is scenario 3, where there's funds set aside above and beyond REIT at 150 and beyond the TBD $20 tab fee. There would be additional dollars that would be allocated to the program to keep your PCI, pavement condition index score, at 80 for the next 5-year horizon.
What would that be approximately, as far as the additional general fund allocation?
For the $500,000, it'd be close to 140,000
A year.
beyond REIT.
Obviously, 360, 500 minus 360.
Right. So the proposed solution, in looking at scenario 2 and the PCI score in aggregate for citywide network for infrastructure for streets, the 212 investment this year that council approved and the 350 moving forward, we feel from a staff perspective would be an appropriate path to take at this point, and looking further into forming a transportation benefit district and adoption of a $20 per vehicle fee. So within the revised Code of Washington 3673015, it has all the specific criteria about creating a TBD, the quasi-municipal corporation, the nature of it, independent taxing district. It also has several revenue options, some of which are subject to voter approval. A TBD is not subject to a voter approval. It could be taken action on by city council.
Unless you impose it for more than $20.
Right. Yep, that's the threshold. And there are TBDs that
You
are.
go up to 40 with the vote, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep, and I have a reference of a few other jurisdictions that have leveraged the TBD framework. And again, it's created by ordinance and legislative authority proposing to establish the TBD and the governing body in an ex officio and independent capacity. So the baseline framework, publish notice of a public hearing, hold the public hearing, and adopt an ordinance creating the TBD. There's some specifics around setting the limits as far as what it will serve, short of taking into consideration any annexations, the functions and powers of the quasi-municipal benefit district. And it's also noted that fees should be by separate ordinance after the TBD board has been created. Lots of times the TBD board is, in fact, the elected body of the jurisdiction.
If you created a TBD at the $20 level without a vote, can the TBD then, after it comes into existence down the road, say, I want to raise it to $40?
No.
Or does that require a vote?
Not currently.
It
Currently, it requires a vote.
It requires a vote. There was a piece of legislation that after a TBD had imposed a $20 fee, I think it was for 2 years, that it could then go to 40 without a vote, but that was part of the overall transportation package that didn't move forward. So the only revenue that a TBD can generate without a vote is $20 tap fee.
So there is a safeguard?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
And it's an annual fee for how long? Indefinitely?
It's, the idea behind the TBD and the license plate fee was, it was an ask of local governments to, of the state, to provide a tool that wasn't as market volatile as some of the other capital funding sources that we have, like real estate excise tax. A tool for the option of locals to use that would be dedicated for pavement management. So this is the result of what we asked for. Mayor, do you want to pick this up after
Yeah,
the
I'm
break?
thinking, at this point, Trev's pretty much gone through all the pieces up to how we actually form one, how it would move forward, and some of the other options that you've got available to you as well. So let's go ahead and take a recess at this point. We'll adjourn this meeting. Be back here at 7 o'clock for our regular meeting. We'll have public comments early on in that meeting, and then Trev, I'll put you onto the agenda to finish this one out.
Okay.
Great. See everybody back here at 7.
Can I go?